What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Haunted Beard. Thank you for joining me. Today, I am wrapping up and concluding my Child's Play series of reviews and talking about the latest film, Child's Play from 2019. Let's get into it. So, Child's Play 2019 is, of course, a remake from the original film, only this time it is upgraded and updated, and Chucky gets an update, only this time he's not just a doll, he's a doll with technology upgrades, and he comes with his own app that you can download, and he can connect to Wi-Fi and run a bunch of different programs around the house. He's kind of like Amazon's Alexa, only he's a doll. And we start off inside the Chucky doll manufacturing plant as we see one of the workers being reprimanded, and he's pissed off about it and decides to go rogue, and so he hacks one of the Chucky dolls and removes all the safety precautions and whatnot, and turns the Chucky doll into a killer. And to me, just a few minutes into this thing, we're already off to not as good of a start as the original. In terms of just the origin of the Chucky doll, it's just not as good of an origin story. Whereas in the original, you've got a pretty cool and compelling origin story with Charles Lee Ray, an actual serial killer played by the great Brad Dourif, puts his spirit and body into the Chucky doll. And here, it's just this rogue employee who is pissed off at management and decides to hack one of the Chucky dolls, and then the dude jumps off the building and kills himself. And so we don't learn anything about this employee. We have no connection to them whatsoever. And so to me, one of the things that I think the Child's Play remake is missing is Chucky having more of a personality, right? Whereas the original film and obviously all the sequels, you get an actual personality of the serial killer of Charles Lee Ray inside Chucky. And that personality just comes to life. Whereas here, he's just a robot that has been reprogrammed to be a killer. And it's just not as compelling of an origin story. And some of the setup here is similar to the original film. You've got, obviously, a mother and her son living in an apartment. They're on kind of the more lower class on the economy scale. And, you know, they're struggling to get by and paying the bills. The dad's not in the picture. Andy here is a little bit older than he was in the original film. Then we're introduced to Aubrey Plaza's character, who is Andy's mom. And she works at Zedmart, which is basically the equivalent of Walmart. And she ends up getting one of these good guy dolls that has been returned. And so she's able to get a good deal on it and takes it home to her son, Andy. And real quick, Aubrey Plaza, I'm a fan of hers. I think she's pretty funny. I think she has some good humor in this, a few moments. I wish they would have had a little bit more to it, because I think she definitely carries a pretty good kind of comedic presence about her. I wish we would have gotten a little bit more out of it. However, on the flip side, some of the choices she makes as a mom are just not very smart and wise choices. And like just a few minutes after being introduced to her in the movie, and like one of the first scenes involving her son where we're seeing their relationship, she's telling her son Andy to go outside and play by himself in like one of the sketchiest neighborhoods I have ever seen. And it's like, what are you doing? It's all kind of just very strange and odd. So there's part of the mother-son dynamic here that is pretty decent. And again, I like Aubrey Plaza. But at the same time, there's some choices here made by the mom that you're just like, why? It's just not a good decision. And not long after this, we get really kind of our first introduction into the new Chucky and the new redesigned Chucky. And I'm not really a big fan of the new Chucky redesign, as I just feel like the proportions of his face are just kind of weird. His eyes, his cheeks, his mouth, it just feels a little bit off, and I'm just not really a big fan of it. One of the things that the new Child's Play does a little bit differently, too, has to do with the dynamic between Andy and Chucky, where Chucky is now, at least in the beginning stages of their friendship, relationship, whatever you want to call it, Chucky's kind of like a dog. He just sort of follows Andy around. Andy has to teach him things, and they like become best buddies. And that also speaks to a little bit of the difference of the dynamic in this compared to the original, in that the original, Charles Lee Ray just wants to swap his body and get back into Andy, whereas here, they make it well known that Andy doesn't really have any friends, and so Chucky actually takes to Andy, and he sees it as his duty, much like a dog, to kind of be his guardian and his protector and stuff like that. And so there's a little bit difference of a dynamic there between Andy and Chucky. And for the most part, I like that change in direction. I like that different dynamic. I think it is a good idea. However, the execution of it is kind of 50-50 for me. Another thing that the remake does different than the original that I think is probably the best part and the best decision from a writing perspective that the remake does has to do with the kills, in that in the original, Andy is trying to convince everybody that Chucky's a real life doll and a killer, and of course nobody believes him, whereas in the remake, Andy can't say anything. And so I like how they kind of switch that around, and he can't tell anybody that Chucky's real because Chucky starts framing Andy for the murders. And he records Andy's voice and uses that to sort of frame Andy and make it look like Andy's the one who's responsible. And so Andy knows that if he says anything, not only is nobody going to believe him, but Chucky's just going to keep on killing people. And so I thought that that was a pretty good decision to kind of take this story in that sort of direction. I particularly liked the scene where Chucky ends up killing their cat, and he records Andy's voice saying that he can't stand the cat. And so now that Andy discovers the dead cat, he knows he can't say anything because Chucky's got his voice. He's going to make it look like Andy did it. And then I love, there's just this brief little scene that I think is a really good scene, and it really stands out, where Chucky is standing in the corner of Andy's bedroom and actually wakes Andy up from sleep playing the sound of the cat as it's being killed by Chucky. It's just a great, creepy little scene that I think is pretty great. Not long after this, we get our first, like, genuine, solid kill in the movie, and it's the kill of the character of Shane, who is Andy's mom's boyfriend. And as if we don't already hate this guy enough, we find out that he has an actual family. And Chucky follows him to his house, and this scene here kind of has just some cool lighting. They make use of the Christmas lights and kind of gives it sort of this nice, colorful, Christmassy glow and flair to it. And then he falls off the ladder, snaps his legs, and then Chucky kills him with, like, some sort of, I don't even know what it is, some sort of lawn care machine equipment or something like that. Anyway, this guy's head just gets totally obliterated by this piece of equipment. And overall, it's a pretty satisfying and pretty solid kill. And then this scene gets followed up with another pretty solid scene where Andy wakes up the next morning only to find Shane's decapitated head sitting on his desk in his room. One of the things that I think the remake struggles with is they definitely tried to insert some comedy into this, and I think they have trouble kind of balancing the comedic tone with the more serious tone, as once Andy finds the decapitated head of Shane sitting on his desk in his room, he ends up wrapping it in gift wrap paper, and then it ends up getting brought over to the neighbor lady as if he's presenting her with some present, and then he convinces her to wait to open it until Andy's birthday. It's just this completely absurd and ridiculous scene that's definitely played for comedic effect, and it is comedic to a degree, but it feels weird because then the very next scene, Andy is super emotional and he's crying as he's talking to Chucky, who's in the closet. And it's like you just kind of went from this sort of lighthearted comedic scene to now this very sort of serious, emotional, dark scene. And the movie just kind of tries to juggle both of these tones, and it doesn't really quite come together that well. And then this gets followed up with a scene where Andy and his couple friends that he's met in the apartment complex decide to shut Chucky off, and Andy's just super distraught and upset about it. And I'm like, why is he so upset to shut Chucky off? The guy just, like, killed people and left the decapitated head in his room, and yet Andy's having a complete emotional breakdown over it. It just didn't really make sense to me. And I feel like the remake has a pretty decent middle section. There's a handful of scenes kind of in the middle of it that are pretty good. But then it sort of starts slowly going downhill for me. And after they shut Chucky off, they throw him down the garbage chute, and the maintenance man picks him up and takes him back to his house. And this maintenance dude ends up replacing Chucky's internal computer processor, whatever you want to call it, his, like, internal mechanism, his brain or something like that. And then he ends up firing him back up, and Chucky comes back to life. And I don't really understand why Chucky is still evil if he has a completely different internal brain sort of thing, because it's like the guy who programmed him from the very beginning switched off all of his safety mechanisms, or whatever you want to call it, and now he's got a brand new one, and he's still evil. That didn't really make sense to me. Then we get our finale in Zedmart, where everybody realizes that Chucky is an actual killer doll. And this whole finale climax is, it's okay. So Chucky launches his assault by sending a bunch of drones after people, and it's just like, oh, brother, like this was just such an eye roll scene that it was just not very good at all. Anyways, Chucky gets Andy's mom, ties her up. Andy comes after, gets her free, stabs Chucky. We think he saved the day. Chucky's dead, only of course, Chucky's got one life left, and he lunges at Andy to kill him. But then Detective Mike, aka Brian Tyree Henry, who we thought was dead, shows up and shoots Chucky at the last second. And like, I mean, how many times have we seen that type of scene? It's just such a cliche climax that we've seen a million times over again, where it's like, oh yeah, you think they're dead. Oh, but they're not really dead. And somebody comes out of nowhere that you think is dead at the last second to save the day. And it's just like, yeah, okay, I guess. Overall, I'm pretty just kind of middle of the road here on the remake. I think Mark Hamill is fine, but man, I really think that they could have utilized him better. I don't think there's enough personality with the new Chucky, and like, he doesn't really have any good lines. And again, it's like there's not really a personality there. He's just this robot that has been programmed to be bad. There's a couple other little things in the movie too that I felt like were kind of underutilized, or like I don't really understand why they were there. There's a brief shot early on in the movie where you see a picture of Andy and his mom and his dad, and it's like quickly shown, and then like there's never a reference made to his dad, or we don't get any part of that story, which I was like, why do you put that shot in there if you're not going to address it? Also too, they make note that Andy has a hearing aid and he's got a hearing issue, and that like never comes into play throughout the rest of the movie. What's the point of that as well? And so, like I said, overall, I'm pretty middle of the road, pretty average on Child's Play. I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10 for the 2019 remake. So those are my thoughts. Hit me up down below. That's all I got for you. That wraps up the reviews for Child's Play, but I'm going to cap off this whole thing by doing my official ranking video, ranking all 8 movies in the Child's Play franchise. So be on the lookout for that. That is coming soon. Like always, hit that subscribe button if you like content like this. Horror and thriller movie content coming at you here. And I'll see you next time on The Haunted Beard.